Hello, I'm Nicole, and this video was created to be a general guide for teachers who are interested in integrating the nature of science into their classroom. I'll first begin with explaining what the nature of science really is, followed by why it's important, and then I'm going to describe the sample lesson provided on our STEPWISE website for your immediate use. So let's begin with describing what we mean when we say the nature of science. Well, the nature of science investigates how knowledge in science is generated, as well as how certain we can be of this knowledge. This includes the special characteristics, values, and assumptions that may influence how knowledge in science is generated. In simple terms, it essentially means how we know what we know in science. Understanding how knowledge is generated in science and evaluating how much faith we can put into that knowledge should be taught in our classrooms. Through her interviews with teachers and philosophers in science, Dr. Kathleen Loving in 1991 developed the scientific theory profile. The first axis shows how knowledge in science is generated, and the second axis regards the truth of conclusions made in science. We will now take a closer look at the scientific theory profile. Keep in mind these are continua, and so the definitions on each of these ends are the extreme positions. The first axis we're going to discuss is the realist and anti-realist continua. This one investigates whether we can determine the truth of the phenomena we are studying. Realists on one end believe that scientists and engineers can develop claims, such as laws and theories, that match phenomena of the world, meaning that these can possibly represent natural phenomena accurately. Whereas anti-realists, they believe that scientists and engineers cannot develop claims that exactly match phenomena of the world, meaning they don't believe laws and theories can represent natural phenomena accurately. The second axis is the rationalist-naturalist continua, which describes how knowledge is generated in the science. Rationalists believe that scientists and engineer topics and methods are highly systematic, logical, and are free of bias and emotional factors that might influence. Whereas naturalists, they believe that scientists and engineer topics and methods are often influenced by personal, social, economic, gender, racial, cultural factors, meaning an experiment of a study will be influenced by non-logical factors. So although this is a grid developed to describe the nature of science, there may be implications for other STEM fields. Now let's move on to explore why we should teach nature of science in our classrooms. It's important to incorporate nature of science discussions in our classrooms because it helps to improve student critical thinking skills, since they will be able to better analyze and assess information, and it helps them develop a deeper understanding of how science knowledge is generated in our world. The second point is that it strengthens metacognitive skills, meaning it strengthens the ability to think about your thinking. And finally, it builds student self-efficacy, meaning that students will be more confident in their ability to discern potentially false information and become more intellectually independent, so they're less reliant on authority figures. Now, there's no doubt about it, nature of science is important around the world and should be taught globally in every classroom. In this example and in this context, let's take a look at the Ontario Science Curriculum. And the first overall goal of the curriculum is to understand STSE, which is the relationship between science, technology, society, and environment. And the thing is, learning about the nature of science will actually allow students to better grasp these STSE issues, because the nature of science and STSE are different sides of the same coin. Last but not least, we will now review the sample lesson created for grade 11 university level biology classroom. This sample lesson is accessible through the STEPWISE website and can be used in the grade 11 university level biology classroom. It's meant to teach Mendelian Genetics with nature of science integrated within. So let's take a closer look at the resource itself. So when you click the link, it's going to open a Google Slides, which contains the entire lesson progression. So as you go on, you have the agenda, the necessary learning goals, and we have the lesson beginning with the students' reflect activity, so the mind's on, followed by talking about the teacher teaches portion, which is basically teaching Mendel's experiments and talking about Mendelian genetics, so all the findings he had. And then we integrate the nature of science concept, which is the Mendelian paradox. And so we have a few slides on this, as well as additional notes for teachers that you can find over here. Now, as you get to the end, you have a student activity. And so here you can interact with the slides by selecting the links that open different YouTube videos that can help teach different lessons. And then the actual activity is also linked over here as a PDF, which is a monster genetics lab to practice their Punnett squared, as well as think about Mendelian's paradox. An important note to make is that in the sample lesson provided, the nature of science component investigates the Mendel's paradox and how scientists are not particularly objective. It's important to note that this is not necessarily bad, and on the contrary, many advances in science, such as Darwin's theory of evolution and Mendelian genetics, have come about through scientists being guided by theory, as opposed to solely relying on data. This relationship is studied in the book Against Method. Now I want to thank you for your time and for listening to this short video. And if you are curious, interested in any of the nature of science concepts, take a look at these resources provided, such as Hodson's book, Toward Scientific Literacy, A Teacher's Guide to the History, Philosophy, and Sociology of Science, as well as some ready-made resources on the STEPWISE website.